Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast, where hope matters. I'm Jimmy Hinton.
And I'm Clara Hinton, and we're so glad that you've joined us.
If you're new to the podcast, please subscribe and share so you never miss an episode. All right, welcome back to this episode of the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast. We were off last week. No real good excuse. We just took a week off.
I think it's called busy, Jimmy. Just busy.
Yeah, so we're back in the saddle and ready to talk. If you remember the last time we were talking about the power of narrative and how narrative really is used by abusers, and we talked about some of the methodology behind that. And so today, we're just going to kind of make that practical. And, you know, maybe some of our readers or listeners rather are thinking, okay, well, you know, that's good information, but what does that look like in the real world? You know, it's great to talk about techniques and method and how people use narrative, but what does that actually look like? So we're going to share some personal stories, and hopefully help you gain a better idea of what this looks like in the real world, because at the end of the day, I think most of us probably know when we're being manipulated. You know, you get that icky feeling or that you feel sick in the gut feeling. A good example is car salesman. I hate buying cars, by the way. It's a fun Jimmy fact. I hate buying cars because salesmen are just dirty and gross. At least that's been my experience. Some
salesmen.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, not all of them. And I did have a good experience. I have to share this because I bought a car last year. It was last April. And I went in, and this car salesman, his name was Dave. And so, Dave, if you're listening, I love you, dude. You were awesome. But I showed up to the dealership, and I had called beforehand. I drove 2 hours to go look at this car. And Dave had the keys to the car in the ignition. I showed up. He didn't try to pretend like he was my best friend. He didn't, you know, tell me all the bells and whistles of the car. He didn't pretend like he knew about cars when he really didn't. He just said, yep, keys are in it. He said, take it for a spin. Take as long as you want. Bring it back. Let me know if you like it or not.
I like that.
Yeah.
I do.
And it was one of those no haggle
like
places.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that when I went to the dealership, that it was a no haggle pricing. So the price that's on the car is the price that you pay, period.
Okay.
And so I started to talk about, you know, can you help me? Can you bring this down any? And he just looked at me and he goes, nope. He's like, maybe you're not aware of this, but he said, my sticker price that's on the car is what you pay. And he's like, I don't like negotiating. I don't like kissing people's rear ends. You know, he was pretty straightforward. He's like, I like people to know exactly what they're buying, and what you see is what you get. And he said, so do you want the car or not?
I love that, and very rare is the person that deals like that.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
But I told him, I was like, Dave, you have just made purchasing a car one of the best experiences ever. And I was like, thank you for not pretending to be my friend. And thank you. You know, I just thanked him. I was like, you were honest from the time I came in, and I said, I will happily drive 2 hours to buy every single car from here on out. I will buy off of you.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
So, yeah, not all car salesmen, but the ones who are, you know what I mean? Like, as they're talking, you know you're being manipulated. You try to resist it. And even when they get on your nerves and they irritate you and you know that you're being played, you drive off the lot with a new car.
Well,
and you're cussing him under your breath.
They know the words. They know the body language. They know what charisma to use they've trained for that.
Mm-hmm.
That's why they sell so many cars.
Right.
And it's an art. It's a learned art. And I think that's what we're going to talk more about, is bringing this home, how in our own situation with an abuser in the family, how this manipulation and use of all these skills aided in the abuse.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Jimmy, you want to lead into this?
Yeah, we really want to hone in on emotions. And we had talked last time about how, emotions really prioritize your attention, your spotlight of attention. And so it doesn't matter what the emotion is. It can be laughter. It can be sadness. It can be, it can even be ambiguous emotions. It doesn't matter what the emotion is, but emotions automatically prioritize our spotlight of attention. And, we get drawn into that narrative. And so whether it's the punchline of a joke or whether it's just like a critical moment where you begin to tear up, somebody's telling a story and tears start welling up in your eyes as they're talking. There's that moment where your brain has this, almost like a lapse where your spotlight of attention really dramatically changes. And so, as Susana Martinez Conde said, all magicians will tell you that it's during the punchline of a joke when the audience is laughing where most of the magic happens. So, I wanted to really focus in on that and talk about the emotion of narrative and how, my dad used emotion all the time. And it wasn't necessarily to abuse. He just practiced.
He practiced it, and he
using
was
emotion to a
expert
narrative.
at it. He was very expert at it. He could evoke any emotion in any person, and I think you brought it out best the last time we met when you said he could have taught from a satanic book. And you would have believed it because he knew just how to phrase everything, how to prey on a person's emotions, that what he said could override any truth that a person knew. And that's important in the world of abuse when a child is getting abused and being told, this is special between me and you. This is special. This is what how God told me to love you. Or it could be the fear emotion, whatever it is. These abusers know how to do this, but they also know how to prey on the emotions of the adults so that they are loved and trusted, and you will think to your dying day, never could that person commit this abuse. Never. Never. That's why your dad sits in prison right now. And people, I just had it happen last week, come up to me and say, I feel so bad for him. Did he really get life in prison? I just feel that's so wrong. He did so much good. And I'm standing there listening. And it's like, how do you respond to that without anger? Because they're missing the point. He's in prison because he abused many children.
Severely abused. Satanically abused.
Yes.
His victims.
Yes. But the truth, because of the emotion that he caused and knew how to use with people, truth doesn't matter. They don't see that. It's like the neuroscientist said, in that moment of emotion, when you're attached to that person, you don't want to hear the truth. You can't hear it. You cannot hear it. You can't comprehend it.
Well, and we had talked about narrative through preaching in the last episode, but narrative is really used all the time. And so in daily conversations, narrative is used. And so he was always known by us kids as, the dad who always joked around. He was funny. He was relatable. And he was always cracking jokes. And, we never...
He never worried.
Never saw him angry.
He never had a care.
No.
When it came to discipline, honestly, I was the grouchy old crazy mother. And he was the father who would say, come on, they're boys. They're just boys. They're kids. Didn't you ever do anything like that when you were a kid? Or do you know what it's like being a preacher's kid? Leave them alone. And you kids loved and adored him, but so did all your surrounding friends.
Yeah.
He was that epitome of a dad because of that. Because of that emotional power that he had.
Yeah. But I think that's what people need to realize, too. Like, it really bothers me when I hear research that talks about abusers only relating to kids and they don't have normal adult relationships. And I'm like, that's just not how it works. That's not truth. And maybe for a small minority of child sexual abusers. But I would say for the vast majority, at least my experience has been, they're the people who, they relate really well to both adults and children. And they're the people who the adults turn to for advice. They're trustworthy. They're at least seemingly trustworthy. They're relatable. That's the reason people do go to them for advice. That's the reason they don't have to seek people out. The abuser doesn't have to seek people out. The irony is that other people seek the abusers out. And they love it. They love that they get that kind of attention, and it's because they're soft-spoken, they're kind, they're patient, they're funny.
Tolerant of everyone.
Tolerant.
Yes.
They also, part of what makes them relatable is, speaking of narrative and emotion, is that they can tell stories, and my dad was a master at this. He could tell stories. If you were to go to him with life's biggest crisis, he would always find a way to tell a story about himself and tie that into that person's story. And it just seemed so relatable. You
were left. You did not want him to stop talking.
Yeah.
You did not. You could listen to him forever, and he made you feel somehow good. No matter what was happening, it was going to be okay. You were fine. You were good. You were going to be fine. You would find a way out of whatever it was. Whatever was happening, he could talk you through it smoothly and confidently, gently. He was great at that. Absolutely great. There's a period in our lives in the year 2000 when your dad got into some deep legal problems with securities and deposits, and through his insurance, what he was doing was swindling money off of elderly people. There were a group of 8 men involved in this case. Once again, I was naive, totally blindsided by what was happening until the FBI came in. And for those of you who are listening, if you just Google his name, it'll come up, the history of this. But what was interesting to me was that all of the salesmen and the 2 higher-ups went to prison and served time except for your dad. And he was the one initially that was told by the district attorney, it's going to be much worse for you, John Hinton, because you are a man of trust. You used your trust on people to swindle them out of money. But until they were through with their investigation, which lasted it was 6 years. A horrifying time in our lives, all of us. But he won over every person there, including the FBI. And I'll never forget the day of the trial, the FBI walking your dad into the courtroom and laughing and joking with him. Laughing and joking.
Well, and I think it's important too, and I don't remember if we had talked about this before, but the prosecuting attorney, he actually left his family on vacation and flew up, and he testified on behalf of my dad.
Yes. Yeah.
The prosecuting attorney.
It is so...
And I was there. You and I were both there.
We were there.
I could not, literally couldn't believe that. But at the time, like we were thankful, we were relieved,
Absolutely.
we were singing his praises ourselves.
We believed in your dad also. But come to find out, he was truly guilty. He knew what he was doing. He used words such as calling people, his clients, his mooches. It was on tape. He was calling them that. He'd say, let's go out and let's see who we can clean out today. They were taking $250,000 at a time from people, from these elderly people. But it didn't matter, because he had that emotional power over people, that they looked at him, and he had this quiet, gentle, spirited look, and he was believable. He kept saying, I didn't know this was a bad company. I had no idea. And it was very
believable.
It was very believable.
Well, you talking reminded me of a story that I heard the other day that I never knew about him, and you may have never heard this story.
Okay, hit me with it. Hit me with it, Jim.
He went into people's homes, and this was one of my siblings who told me this story, and this came out of Dad's mouth himself, because he was bragging about this.
Okay.
I mean, many years ago.
I'm almost afraid, because,
Well, he would go into people's houses when he was selling insurance, and one of his tactics was to light up a cigarette. He would carry a pack of cigarettes in his pocket. Now, remember his whole...
I did not...
I'm allergic to smoke.
Wow.
Yeah.
No.
Around us...
No. Never heard this.
Around us, he...
oh, wow.
Anytime he was around campfire smoke or anything like that, it was always dramatic.
Right.
I'm allergic to smoke, and it just bothered me. So he would carry a pack of cigarettes into their house, and it was these elderly people, and he would, if he could tell he wasn't closing in on the sale, he would pull out a cigarette in their home, light up a cigarette, and of course these little old ladies are freaking out, and they're like, Mr. Hinton, you can't do that.
Oh.
And like he's laughing about this, and he's like, so I would just keep smoking and be like, oh well, here, and then he'd shove the contract over and say, if you just sign here, I'll be out of your house in a second.
Unbelievable.
And so he used that, and they were so desperate to get him out of the house, and he created such an uncomfortable environment.
Wow.
And he was laughing to one of my siblings who told me this.
Oh, wow.
And he was laughing about it and was like, I would close the sale every single time. He's like, every time, because they couldn't stand and they were in such shock that I lit a cigarette in their home. They just wanted to get rid of me.
We were married almost 40 full years. I never saw him put a cigarette to his mouth.
Mm-mm.
Ever.
Mm-mm. Oh, he did.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's things like that, from what we see.
Oh, wow.
And what we saw, you would never believe that story if he told it to you. And so the sibling who he told that to was probably in shock and was like, yeah, right. Like he's making up
telling
this,
a big tale.
he's making up this story, and, but now I look back and I'm like, he did that and much worse. But it's just, that power of narrative, and prioritizing people's emotions. Again, like lighting up the cigarette, propping your feet up on people's, like he talked about that too. He would prop his feet up on their nice furniture, pull out a cigarette and light up a cigarette. Well, that elicits anger and frustration.
Right.
And in that moment, that's when he slid the piece of paper across the contract and had them sign it. That most likely didn't have a clue what they were signing, but he'd closed the deal.
I'm sure they didn't, and collected a check, and that was it.
So that narrative is, it's so powerful. It's such a powerful weapon if it's used as a weapon.
Each of us can probably think back in our lives to when we were used like that, different times in sales or whatever it is. But when you relate it to abuse, it becomes so critical in understanding how the abusers do this and how they get away with it for so long. Never in a million years, I still say, would I ever have connected the dots to your dad being an abuser of children. Ever. I lived with him. I breathed with him. I talked with him. I laughed with him. I cried with him. I worshiped at church with him. Never would I believe. He preached sermons about being kind to children. He'd have the entire church in tears, warning people that if you are the person that, does not treat children, how Jesus said, come unto me, to the children, if you turn them away, he would teach sermon after sermon. And I thought, he is a wonderful dad. No doubt about it. He's walking the talk. It destroys people to find out the truth when we come to a realization and are able to believe the truth. But that's the tricky part, Jimmy.
Yeah.
I think that's the really tricky part.
I was just watching just this morning, and this is completely unrelated, and I don't even know why this came up, but I found this news story of, her name is Dalia DiPolito. I'm looking at her name here, and I think that's how you pronounce it. Dalia DiPolito. So she's a 34-year-old gorgeous woman. Just real pretty lady, soft-spoken, goes to the gym, quiet little lady that works out, and, everybody likes her, has her circle of friends. She marries this guy, and she ended up hiring a hitman who somebody tipped the police off and found out she was going to do this in a very roundabout way. But long story short, they set up a sting operation, and it's all police officers who are acting. So they have her on film.
Oh, okay.
And so I'm watching this documentary on this. It's a short documentary, and she's in the car with the officers, and just so cold-hearted, cold-blooded. She's like, yeah, I want him dead. And the guy was like, well, I'm going to need $1,200 cash to buy a gun. She pulls the cash out.
Wow.
Hands it to him. And she's like laughing and giggling. Wow. And she goes, the great part is, she's like, nobody would expect quiet little me.
That's the bingo. There.
And so bingo. She knew it. And she was banking on her good looks and her sweet, charming personality.
Right.
And so then they go to another officer who is playing the hitman, the actual hitman. And this guy's actually given her opportunity, because they wanted to make sure to have a solid case, you have to make positive, 100% sure that they're actually willing to go through with it up to the last minute. Okay. And so this officer who's playing the hitman says, once you commit to this, there is no backing out. Your husband will be dead. And he said, any chance that you're going to get cold feet, you're going to want to back out, he said, I need to know, because I don't want a chance that you're going to go and confess to the cops. So, is there any backing out? She giggled, and she's like, oh boy, I am 5,000% sure that I want to do this. And so they ended up, it was really weird how it all worked out, but the TV show Cops happened to be in her town right at the time that they were going to do the arrest, on the date of the supposed hit. So I think part for Hollywood's sake, they staged a fake murder, because they had to notify the husband that, your husband or your wife is trying to kill you. Mm-hmm. So they notified him, took him into protective custody, and set up a fake crime scene at the house. Called her up at work and said,
it's so done.
So they call her up and they say, Dahlia, you need to come to your house. Yeah. There are a bunch of police there, and we need you here immediately. Mm-hmm. So she shows up, and the cops lie to her and say, your husband's been killed. To watch her act, it is absolutely stunning how she just fell apart. And they said, had we not watched the tapes of her with our officers, we would never have believed a lie, because she was physically trembling, and she was, she looked so broken, and she's crying and she's screaming, and why God, and
this
it's crazy.
We can laugh at this because it's so absurd and so unreal, but real.
Mm-hmm.
But in the world of abuse, it happens every single day.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the world of abuse is about. Deceit, lies, emotional power, and all of that, and disguising oneself to be something that you're not. Mm-hmm. And so good at it, so masterful at it, that you rarely get caught. That's our job, to educate all of us, really, to be on our toes. Mm-hmm. It's like I said to you previous to this taping, who do you believe anymore? Mm-hmm. It's frightening. It really, really is.
Well, I think some good advice, some good advice is, okay, we kind of described a little bit what that looks like in the real world. So what do you look for? Well, I would say probably the most important advice that I could give is don't get drawn in by people's personalities. Be cautious about that, and don't just let people's charm sweep you away. Listen to actual facts. Listen for deceit. Listen for manipulation. This woman, Dahlia, whatever her last name is, she was playing everybody. She was pretending to be this sweet little charming, cute woman that everybody loved and adored. But in that process of building that facade is a lot of weird, bizarre stuff, and people make mistakes, and you can tell when people are being fake. Usually. That's not a concrete thing, so I don't want people to be overconfident in that.
I think we get that gut feeling.
Yeah.
When something is really critically wrong. I know I journaled about it for years with your dad in my private journals. I would say something like, there's something off, and I can't figure it out.
See, and I never felt that way about him until my wife pointed out to me.
Well,
we at this point, we didn't know he was abusing kids. We didn't know anything about that, but my wife had made a comment, and she said, I really hate your dad. And that, I was so offended by that.
I'm sure.
And she said, your dad is the biggest liar, cheat, and manipulator that I've ever met. She said, he comes off as being an honest person, and everybody, her words, she was a little blunt, but she said, everybody kisses his butt, but she said, I'm not falling for it. She's like, he's a liar. And I was so offended by that.
But she was on the outside. She didn't have that emotional attachment to him yet.
But once she said it, by golly, I noticed it.
Off.
Now, at the time, I didn't know anything about child sexual abuse. And so I never would have guessed that at the time. I would now. But I started seeing these patterns of lies and deception, and how he was bullying me and deceiving me, and all the gaslighting that he was doing, and all these weird, bizarre things. I started seeing it plain as day.
Right. Now, I saw the odd stuff, and I, of course, felt it in our marriage. I lived with it, but would never have connected it to child abuse. Now would I? Absolutely. Some of the language he used, very quietly slip in a word there, or very quietly slip in an action. I remember one time he was with one of your sisters. She had her friends at the house. They were getting ready to go off on a youth retreat. He was the driver, and Jimmy, quick as lightning, he bent over, touched his knees, and pulled his pants down, bared his rear end in front of everybody, and pulled his pants back up, quick as like that. And I remember just saying, oh my word, what did you just do? And he just looked and said, what? Nobody said a word. Was that weird? That's weird. That's just weird. A little bit. Well, it gets more weird because I talked to a couple from church about it, and you know what they said? I think you're wrong. He would never do that. You must have been upset that day. He would never, ever do that. And I never talked to anybody after that about any odd things. Would I connect it to child abuse? Now I would. Then I just thought the guy he's off. There's something wrong with him. Mm-hmm. There's something wrong. You don't do that stuff. Mm-hmm. You just don't. But, when we have that attachment, to people, you just get sucked in. You truly do. You get sucked in. Like the girl you mentioned that's planning the murder. Who would ever have thought it?
Oh, and if you've got to watch the video. If you look up her name on YouTube, let's see what her name is again. Dahlia, Dalia, Dippolito, Dippolito. There's some recent stories as early as late last year. But if you look at her in these videos on YouTube, like the difference between her when she's being interviewed, because they interviewed her prior to her arrest. Okay. She finally came forward and gave statements, and she's like, no, she said, this was just acting. So her defense is her and her husband got addicted to reality shows, and they wanted to create a hoax together where they staged this quote-unquote planned hit on her husband. Mm-hmm. And so he was actually in on it. And he just made her take the fall for it because they never thought it would go that far to the cops and blah, 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 blah. And so as you're listening to her, you can almost see the people interviewing her getting reeled in to
sucked
her
into
personality.
That. Well, here I am.
She's so sweet. And she's like this quiet little thing. And she's like, they asked the question, why would we believe you? And she said, because I'm not that person. This was just acting. And I feel so horrible about it. And she's all soft-spoken and sullen.
That is a great, great, great example.
Yeah.
I really do.
But you have to watch the video of her with the undercover cops because this is something that's benign enough where, this is it's not abuse. It's not a fly on the wall. Right. You're not going to be triggering people by watching this. Right. It's just her talking
But it will teach us volumes about
how people maintain that
narrative.
Yeah.
Yes.
And how people maintain that split
look of innocence.
Personality and the dual life is crazy. Literally crazy.
It is, and it's shattering. I can't think of another word.
But I think what's hard is that, if we imagine what victims of abuse see, hear, and experience, and then the abuser is being doted on by everybody else. And everybody's just singing the praises of this person. And this. How does a victim come forward and say, this person isn't who you think he or she is? How do you tell people that? It takes such
great courage, Jimmy.
It does.
That's why I feel...
It's incredible courage.
I feel so glad to be used by God in this way to help be a voice for victims of abuse, because the courage it would take to stand up against a wall like that, I can't imagine the courage to do it alone.
Yeah.
I cannot. And on that note, I think maybe we better draw things to a close today.
Yep.
And thank our listeners so much for taking this all in and taking the seriousness of it all in, to be on guard at all times. Listen for those small words. Look for those small gestures. Listen to the tones and watch the body language of abuse. It's there. We just have to have our eyes open and be looking for it.
Yep. So we'll leave you with the truth bomb as always. So the truth bomb for today is the biggest deceivers are those in positions of trust. They know how vulnerable people are, and they know how to use their emotions to their advantage. So beware, pay attention, God bless, and we'll catch you next episode. As always, Thank you for tuning in to the Speaking Out on Abuse podcast with Jimmy and Clara Hinton. You can subscribe to the podcast through either of our websites, findingahealingplace.com, jimmyhinton.org, or through iTunes. Please subscribe and share so you never miss an episode.